here today. So being that's the last one, I will jump right in. But yes, we're going to focus on citrulline supplementation today. Quick disclosure, I recently started serving as the scientific advisor. Let me just move. For a dietary supplement company called Shifted. It's actually not even launched yet. It's set to launch in the second quarter of 2021. And I have received research funding from the National Watermelon Promotion Board, which obviously pertains to what we're going to talk about today, since citrulline is largely found in watermelon. So for me, the reason why I became so interested in this topic is just over the years has been this tremendous surge in all of these pump pre-workout products that have been brought to the market. And I've just over the last few years become somewhat obsessed with trying to figure out whether this really works or not, if it's worth our time, worth our money. And one of the primary ingredients that we'll find in these pump supplements is L-citrulline or citrulline malate, which I will today definitely emphasize what the difference is there and what we should be looking for on a label. So, and feeding off of that too, a recent paper that looked at all the top pre-workout supplements that are on the market showed that L-citrulline is among the most common ingredients that are found in the profiles of these multi-ingredient supplements. So there's definitely an interest in this, and there's definitely lots on the market for getting your pre-workout L-citrulline in. And on average, they were found in 71% of the products that they looked at, with a dose of around 4 grams, which is an effective dose that we'll talk about today. So with me kind of just giving my background, I just became really interested in this over the years. We conducted a randomized controlled trial in my lab, and I just became obsessed with it. So I teamed up with Dr. Eric Trexler, and we put together this review that was published in 2020 on the effects of citrulline supplementation. So my goal today is to kind of give the cliff notes of this paper, and I'm going to focus on giving you the background on L-citrulline, what it might actually be doing in the body, what we think it might be doing with some of the potential mechanisms of action. And then I'm going to focus for today, given the time that I have, on what is the evidence on blood flow. Does it actually enhance blood flow and resistance training performance? Just so you know, our paper also includes endurance and high intensity exercise. But for time purposes today, I'm going to focus on what I'm most interested in and passionate about, which is the resistance training and resistance exercise studies that I will briefly summarize for us today with some takeaway points. All right, so first, so what is L-citrulline? So maybe some of you, this is a new supplement to you. It's definitely one that hasn't been researched as much as something like the beta alanines that we talked about earlier from Dr. Stout, or something like creatine, right? It has nowhere near as much research on it. It's definitely growing right now with the body of evidence that we have. So today we can kind of summarize it all, and you can leave with this discussion knowing what has been done and what is the evidence actually saying. So what actually is it? It is a non-essential amino acid. It's found primarily in watermelon. That's why you saw the title of this talk had watermelon brought up into it. It's also found in things like cucumbers and some other melons, but really is only found in rich quantities in watermelon in our diets naturally. As far as what is it actually doing, if we put one short and sweet definition to its function, it's serving as an endogenous precursor to L-arginine. And we'll talk about in just a moment why it's actually superior to L-arginine supplementation as a pre-workout supplement. And over the last really 5-10 years now, it's just gained a lot of attention for its potential to do things such as increase L-arginine bioavailability, increase nitric oxide production, which is why we see in all these NO boosters and muscle pump products. And ultimately, does it actually increase exercise performance? Studies are starting to look into this as well. So I put together this nice little mechanism of action so we can kind of get a feel for what is it actually doing and why would we even consider supplementing with citrulline in the first place? So ultimately, we supplement with citrulline with the goal of not only increasing citrulline in the bloodstream, but really to increase L-arginine bioavailability in the bloodstream. So we supplement with citrulline, it increases the L-arginine bioavailability. That L-arginine can then be used and taken up by the endothelial cells as that inner lining of our blood vessels and our arteries, where it goes through a nitric oxide synthase dependent reaction where L-arginine is converted to nitric oxide. We actually recreate L-citrulline in that pathway, but ultimately we get nitric oxide. And that nitric oxide can then be taken up through the layers of the vessel down to the smooth muscle. And what that nitric oxide stimulates is a process by which GTP gets converted to cGMP, ultimately lowering calcium release. All right, so I won't focus on the specifics of the biochemical pathway, but ultimately it lowers calcium release. And what does that do? Is it stimulates vasodilation, right? The opening of the arteries to promote more blood flow, potentially getting more nutrients, oxygen, and substrates into the muscle. So that's kind of the theory of where citrulline comes from. All right, so we supplement with citrulline. We have the potential to increase L-arginine bioavailability, which in turn can increase nitric oxide production. And the theory here is that there's a good rationale for that nitric oxide production to actually positively influence our blood vessels and the skeletal muscle. So the first kind of mechanism here is what we just covered. Nitric oxide can promote vasodilation, which in turn can lower blood pressure, increase blood flow, and theoretically increase the oxygen and nutrient delivery to the working muscles while we're running, lifting weights, whatever activity we're doing. At the muscle level, there's also been some speculation that it also might increase mitochondrial efficiency, lower the oxygen cost of exercise, decrease the ATP cost of muscle contractile force production. There's actually some evidence showing that you don't use as much ATP and creatine phosphate when you have nitric oxide being produced simultaneously. And it also might increase calcium handling, both at the vessel level, like we mentioned already, but also at the skeletal muscle level. So all of these haven't been exactly teased out as perfect mechanisms of citrulline, but this is kind of the speculation that we supplement with L-citrulline to increase L-arginine bioavailability, and therefore it should help promote all of these positive and favorable things that come with nitric oxide production. So if you're like me, when I first started looking into this, the question probably on your brain is, well, then why don't we just supplement directly with L-arginine? And in this great review in 2017 from Figueroa and colleagues, they put this nice little picture together that shows basically arginine does not increase L-arginine concentrations in the blood as well as citrulline. And the reason for that is because when we ingest L-arginine, it suffers significant catabolism by the enzyme known as arginase in the gut and in the intestines. So it actually gets broken down before it can actually make its way into the bloodstream and become usable. Alternatively, if we supplement with L-citrulline does not get broken down by enzymes in the gut to any appreciable degree. It gets taken up into the bloodstream much better, where it can be brought to the kidney and converted to L-arginine at a very good rate. So not much gets lost. So for these reasons, over the last, again, decade or so, a lot of the research emphasis and supplements on the market have shifted from promoting and discussing how can we supplement L-arginine to this discussion on L-citrulline possibly being the better alternative to the two. And directly in that line of thought, a great review paper was just published in 2020, really just within the last few months here, this paper came out, and they had, excuse me, they had a great chart where they actually compared citrulline to arginine. And just some of the key points that I mentioned there, just to summarize here. So why is citrulline the better alternative to L-arginine? Because it does not get broken down in the intestines as much. It does not suffer first pass metabolism. Renal absorption is more efficient from citrulline. It has shown to actually increase arginine concentrations in the blood to a higher degree than directly supplementing with arginine. This one's interesting, the effects on arginase. So that, remember that arginase is that enzyme that would degrade arginine. When citrulline is present, it actually inhibits the actions of arginase. So it actually has a double effect there. Citrulline is better absorbed, and it's actually potentially inhibiting that breakdown of the arginine that's being created. And then the contribution to nitric oxide production is more efficient. And safety and tolerability, the one that I have not mentioned yet, shows to be higher with citrulline. When you take high doses of arginine, that's the one that usually leads to some stomach issues, especially at higher doses, whereas citrulline has shown to be relatively safe even at higher doses without really any measurable side effects being seen in the research up to now. All right, so overall, yeah, L-arginine supplementation just simply does not seem to effectively support nitric oxide synthesis to the same degree that citrulline would set the stage for. So that's why we see that shift. And even though that seems new, like that only occurred over the last few years, it was actually back in 2008. This is kind of the go-to study that people reference when you compare head-to-head citrulline and arginine. And this study they did exactly that. They looked at the pharmacokinetics of a similar dose of citrulline to a similar dose of arginine. And takeaway message here was that citrulline increased systemic circulation of L-arginine, and they looked at some markers of nitric oxide dependent signaling, and both of those were elevated more effectively with the group that took citrulline rather than supplementing directly with arginine. Okay, so hopefully at this point, just giving a little background on where this all came from, where it's all started, and why would we consider, consider supplementing with citrulline, and some of the potential mechanisms of action. Also, one more slide here on the potential mechanism of action. Citrulline has also been suggested to potentially increase lactate clearance and also increase ammonia clearance because of its role in the urea cycle. So both of those kind of being in that realm of fatigue fighting as well. And on the bottom there, citrulline has also, in a small number of studies, shown to potentially increase muscle protein synthesis and anabolism. However, I'm very skeptical on that one with how that would pertain to a strength and power athlete, for example, because all those studies are really being shown in protein deficient and highly catabolic conditions. So not probably all that relevant to an athlete who's eating an adequate amount of protein. But there is some interesting mechanisms there that it could potentially be playing a role in anabolism and helping with things like muscle protein synthesis. All right, so before I go into the actual studies and showing what it could not be doing in exercise performance, especially with strength and power types of activities. First, just kind of going over the dosage. So what kind of dosage would we recommend and what's being used in studies and even in products these days? So I started by saying that it's found in a lot of products at around 4 grams. So let's see if that's actually an effective dose or not. So also, if we go back to 2008, right? So there was this classic, they called it the Citradose pharmacokinetic study. And I'll give you the cliff notes on this. So in this study, they actually did a dose response study looking at up to 15 grams of citrulline. So groups were either given 2 grams, 5 grams, 10 grams, or 15 grams. And they looked at the pharmacokinetics, right? How well does it get into the bloodstream? How much citrulline gets elevated in the bloodstream? And particularly also, they were looking at how much arginine gets elevated in the bloodstream. So up to 15 grams was studied, and really there were very limited to no side effects, even at the higher doses of 10 grams and 15 grams. As far as the effects of citrulline, there was a dose-dependent effect on increasing plasma citrulline and arginine, AKA the more the better, right? So the higher the dose, the better it increased plasma concentrations of arginine and plasma concentrations of citrulline. And as far as timing goes, if you said, well, how long does it take to reach the peak in the bloodstream, with the typical doses that we see in research and in products on the market being around 5 to 10 grams, note that the peak really wasn't attained until around 90 to 100 minutes after consumption of that product. And keep that in mind, because that's one of the things that I have trouble with trying to figure out, are we actually getting this timing right? Because most studies don't wait 90 minutes and after taking the dose to actually start the exercise protocol. So that might be something we want to consider in future research. So as a summary from that review that Dr. Trexler and I put out, just some key points here. So based on the evidence, we came to the conclusion that the minimum effective dose would seem to be around 3 grams a day, and usually taken in that pre-workout period because it has the potential to work acutely. While the maximum effective dose, we really don't know. But if we compare it to that pharmacokinetic study, it really could be as high as 10 to 15 grams a day. But I'm still on that conclusion that we really don't know, because studies haven't really given that high of a dose pre-workout, especially with resistance exercise. And especially with resistance exercise, most of the evidence and most of the research provides citrulline in the form of what's known as citrulline malate. So I want to clarify what citrulline malate is here in just a moment, but it's usually at around 6 to 8 grams of citrulline malate. And based on the evidence, if we look at especially the endurance and the intermittent high intensity work, it would seem that chronic dosing, meaning taking it for at least a week, if not more, would seem to be more effective at improving performance than rather just taking one single dose and doing one workout. I say that again, that's based on the endurance studies, because we really don't have that evidence for strength and power and resistance training. It's just no one's really done it. There's only been acute single dose studies looking at the effects on resistance exercise. Which leads me to still having many questions when it comes to dose. I still keep myself up at night thinking about, well, is more actually better, right? Can we actually see a better effect if we give a higher dose? And why haven't we looked at higher doses in research? So there's still a lot more that we need to look at. And the timing issues. Are we getting the timing right? The pharmacokinetics show that it takes around 90 minutes to hit peak in the bloodstream. Do we want to be exercising when it's peaking in the bloodstream or not? There's still a lot of questions to be going on here. So we still need more answers there. So this is one where there's more answers. There's more questions than answers, unfortunately. It's not as highly researched as something like creatine or beta-alanine. And when it comes to citrulline and strength and power sports and resistance exercise, we definitely need more chronic studies. There really are none. I'll show you the one that exists, but it really doesn't help us all that much because of the low dose that was provided. Okay, so next little subsection, just to clarify for everybody in attendance, what is citrulline malate? If we look on the bottle and it says it has 6 grams of citrulline malate versus 6 grams of L-citrulline, what's the difference? What are we getting in that product? Okay, so first, what is malate? Malate is an intermediate of the citric acid cycle, otherwise known as the Krebs cycle. And for that reason, it's been proposed to potentially increase the rate of ATP production, maybe allowing us to get a little more out of our workout, lowering lactic acid production by allowing that continuing of pyruvate and being shuttled into the energy systems. But I really can't emphasize enough the proposed, because it really hasn't been looked at. But it's possible that citrulline and malate might be working synergistically. So we have a lot of the evidence that I'm going to talk about here in just a few minutes has provided citrulline malate, but we still don't really have a great answer on, are they working synergistically? Is it because of the citrulline? Is it possibly because of just the malate? We really don't know. And the reason for that is because no study has ever, that I know of, compared the effects of citrulline malate to L-citrulline. And no study has investigated the effects of malate in isolation. So for everybody in attendance, if you're looking for a little grad or thesis project, this might be a really cool one to consider, because we really don't know these answers. What is malate really offering? Is it really offering any extra synergistic boost, or is it just this combination that we're using in supplements being added to L-citrulline? And even there, I've even talked with Dr. Trexler about this, and we really don't know. We don't know where this all even started. Why are we all giving citrulline malate when we know that citrulline by itself is well absorbed and pretty useful based on the pharmacokinetic study? But a lot of the evidence is providing citrulline malate. So to further clarify what you might get in your product with the citrulline malate, you'll often see it as either a 1-to-1 ratio or a 2-to-1 ratio of the citrulline to the malate. So of course, if it's a 2-to-1 ratio, you're getting a little more citrulline in that 6 to 8 gram dose. So if we're saying 8 grams, a 2-to-1 ratio, you should be getting around 5 grams of citrulline. 1-to-1 ratio, of course, 4 grams of each. So you get about 4 grams of citrulline. However, we have an issue here as well in both research and in the products that are on the shelves. And that is that studies often fail to actually say what ratio they're giving in their study. And the products that are on the shelves, we have an issue there because the study by Chappell in 2018, what they did is actually went on the shelves and bought a bunch of products and tested them. And unfortunately, they don't have as much citrulline as we would have anticipated or would have liked to see in it based on what they're saying. So all of these products, for example, claim to be a 2-to-1 ratio, but you can see they all fell short of being a 2-to-1 ratio. So you may not really be getting as much citrulline as you think. One more question that I wanted to just throw in here quickly is the idea of, can you just eat a lot of watermelon? So we said it's found in watermelon, and I'll summarize this one so I can get into the actual performance information here. And I would say, yeah, you probably could, but it's a lot of watermelon. So I said that we need a 3-gram dose for that minimum effective dose. Long story short, it would take about 5 cups of watermelon to get that dose. So yes, you can do it, but by me, at least in the Jersey, New York area, watermelon's expensive. Actually, a 3 pounds of watermelon is like $15. So that would become a very expensive dietary intervention if you were trying to do it through Whole Foods. So you might want to consider supplementation for this one. And it's been found that citrulline is actually higher in the rind of the watermelon. So you'd kind of need to be a crazy person that eats the shell of the watermelon if you really want to get all the benefits of citrulline. All right, so let's get into what does the actual evidence say, and is it actually helping with performance? I know we're running short on time here already. So does it actually increase blood flow? This one I'm going to summarize rather than going into all the individual studies. Ultimately, it's possible. So L-citrulline or citrulline malate has consistently shown to increase biomarkers that would be indicative of nitric oxide bioavailability. And those are what we said: plasma citrulline, plasma arginine, and nitrate and nitrite. The studies that have actually looked specifically at blood flow parameters are we don't have much, so it's very scarce, and it's very inconsistent. We have some that show yes, some that show no. So very quickly, just to give you some examples and recent studies, in 2020, there was a FMD, flow-mediated dilation study, that did show that 8 grams of citrulline malate could increase endothelial-dependent vasodilation. So this is a direct measure of blood flow in the brachial artery here for this study. And they showed that it did enhance these markers of flow-mediated dilation. However, just to summarize one other study by Trexler and colleagues, they did an exercise protocol and then looked at femoral artery diameter and blood flow, and they found no benefit in the post-workout period when using ultrasound to look at the blood flow parameters. So just my way of showing 2 studies to show you that there is some mixed evidence out there on does citrulline or citrulline malate actually impact blood flow or not. Some would say yes, some would say no. All right, and then actually getting into the studies here. So do studies actually show that we can increase resistance exercise performance is what I'll focus on here. I'll summarize the data here for us. So it's actually pretty easy to lump all these studies together because they're all pretty similar. All of these studies with the resistance exercise looking at citrulline, they're all acute in nature. They give a single dose prior to exercise. The subjects are either resistance trained or recreationally active individuals. There's one study that was done in females that I'll highlight. The dose is always citrulline malate, so we really don't have much with L-citrulline. It's almost always 6 to 8 grams of citrulline malate in these studies. The timing is somewhere around an hour pre-workout, so you can see that's where I'm kind of questioning, maybe we need to wait a little longer before we start the exercise. And all of these protocols have looked at, in some way or another, repetitions to failure during the workout using 60 to 80% of 1 RM. And for time purposes, we don't have time to go through all of these individual studies, but we have about 4 studies currently that show, yes, they get the check that the citrulline malate did allow for more repetitions to be performed. And conversely, we have about 4 or 5, because the Trexler was one, that last Trexler study was done a little bit differently compared to what I said here. That showed no findings. So it did not improve resistance exercise performance or allow for extra repetitions during a resistance training workout. So here are those studies at a glance. For time purposes, again, I will just kind of let you kind of eyeball these for a second, but just showing how many repetitions were allowed by the participants when they were given citrulline malate and given placebo. So these are the exercises that were done in these studies. All of them were typically usually about 3 sets of each, 3 or 4, depending on the study. But you can see in these ones, the subjects were able to get A couple. Right? It's nothing all that noteworthy. It's 3, 4, 5, 6 more repetitions over the whole workout. Okay, and then these ones are the studies that showed null findings. So we have one using an isokinetic machine, bicep curls. The bench press one was the one that came out of my lab. We unfortunately did not show any benefit on bench press performance. We also looked at some muscle thickness measures to be indicative of blood flow into the muscle and did not find any significant changes there from placebo to citrulline malate either. So this is where we're currently at. There's some mixed findings in the resistance exercise literature. Some shows positive benefits on performance, and some shows really nothing really going on. Right, does not do any better than the placebo group. And the one study that was done a little bit differently was the study by Trexler in 2019, and Dr. Smith-Ryan's group as well, who we heard from earlier today with her great presentation. And the difference here was that they provided the 8 grams of citrulline malate 2 hours prior to exercise, did some isokinetic exercise with leg extensions, looking at max effort concentric leg extensions. And this study is probably the most comprehensive to date because they had so many other variables they were looking at. It wasn't only performance. They looked at the blood flow, like I mentioned earlier, some energy metabolism markers, muscle swelling, and hormone responses. And ultimately, there just wasn't a lot going on. Citrulline malate did not alter these variables that they were looking at. All right, so wrapping it up here with our time. So I think this is where we're currently at, right? You'll hear somebody be like, citrulline's the next beta alanine. We just need more research. Or you'll hear the other side of it, citrulline's a waste of money. Don't waste your time with it. So where do I think we are? I think we're somewhere in the middle. We definitely need more research, but there is definitely some favorable research out there that shows that it can actually improve acute performance. So luckily, there's been some recent reviews that I can highlight some of the takeaway messages for us here. So the most recent reviews and meta-analyses is what I'll end with here for today. So the first one was also done by Trexler and Dr. Smith-Ryan's group, where they looked at synthesizing the evidence on citrulline supplementation and any exercise that involved high intensity strength and power performance. Takeaway messages here, where they showed that there was a significant benefit to citrulline supplementation compared to placebo for high intensity strength and power performance. However, they note the effect size was small. So it wasn't this drastic increase that you may look for with a supplement, but it was real, it was meaningful. Next, in 2020, there's a study by Rim and colleagues. They looked at citrulline supplementation and RPE, ratings of perceived exertion, effects on muscle soreness, and the effects on blood lactate levels. Summary here is they showed that citrulline, based on the evidence, around 7 studies, 8 studies for some of these parameters, did significantly reduce ratings of perceived exertion during exercise. They also showed that it did significantly reduce muscle soreness at the 24-hour mark and the 48-hour mark. They actually failed to show that there was any benefit at the 72-hour mark. And the effects on blood lactate were no significant effect. And lastly, I'm proud to acknowledge that just about a week or so ago, I have teamed up with 2 colleagues, and I think Frederick is on the call with us here today. So shout out to him for sure for spearheading this product. But we looked at all those studies that looked at repetition performance. We conducted a systematic review and meta-analysis, trying to summarize that data. And ultimately, when you look at all that repetition to failure studies, we did report a significant increase in repetitions to failure during resistance exercise. But very similar to the Trexler and colleagues study and review paper, we have to acknowledge that the effect size was small. So it was about a 6.4% increase in repetitions to completion in something like 5 sets of bench press, do as many reps as you can in each set, kind of in all the studies that did things like that. So ultimately, there's something there. We need more evidence, and it very well may delay fatigue and enhance muscle endurance during high intensity strength training, but probably isn't as drastic as we would hope. And lastly, I'll leave us with where we need more research. and where I think we need some more studies. And I'm wrapping this up here for us for the day. So the big question is, all right, even if there is this small benefit, does that or will that actually translate into increases in strength and hypertrophy over time? The idea is that if we can increase workout quality and volume, it'll increase the anabolic stimulus and potentially increase long-term adaptation over time. But we really don't know. I'll just leave it at that. And the only study that has been done looking at long-term supplementation, I'll just acknowledge it here because they did administer citrulline malate, but it was low dose, and they did find no differences in the body composition or strength outcomes. So really didn't provide us with any rationale if the effective dose, maybe a higher dose, would have provided any ergogenic benefit over time on strength and power. All right, and lastly, just some things to consider. Again, maybe if some of you being researchers that you want to look into is just some last future directions. So we have mixed findings, so we definitely need some more evidence. Currently, there's no study looking at resistance exercise with long-term dosing, even if something like 7 days. That's one that my lab is ready to go with as once we're allowed to start doing human data again. The citrulline versus citrulline malate, like I said, and we still need more on dosing and timing. And lastly, is there a synergistic effect with other nitric oxide boosters, such as nitrates? There actually is some positive evidence coming out on that, but we definitely need some more randomized controlled trials. All right, so I tried to cover as much as I could in a limited time period there, but thank you so much for staying with me. Here's my contact information, and I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dr. Gonzalez. Yes, in the interest of time, I'm gonna throw one question to you, and then if anyone else has questions for Dr. Gonzalez, he'll answer them via email. I'm sure he will go through all of them. But the one question has to do with compared to other products, and you actually alluded to them, the nitrates, taking beetroot juice, and how about even sildenafil or Viagra? I mean, if you want increases in blood flow, sildenafil does it better than all of it does, correct? So is there like a Viagra, like citrulline stack that you're working on? That's what I've heard.
No, I'm not looking into anything like that. I would be very interested, and I would speculate along with you that, yeah, they may be the superior methodology or product to be looking at for if the goal is to increase blood flow. Interestingly, citrulline has been looked at also as a medication for erectile dysfunction and people with high blood pressure with some efficacy. But yeah, what if we did use these more powerful blood flow enhancers with resistance exercise, such as things like Viagra? It's not something I honestly have looked into all that much, or if those studies even really exist. But yeah, there might be something out there.
Okay. Well, hey, I want to thank the audience. Also, thank all the speakers for sitting through 6 hours of science. I mean, it's not easy to do on a Saturday, especially a beautiful Saturday here in South Florida. A few housekeeping notes for those of you who want to come to our conference. It is in person. The ISSN St. Petersburg, Florida conference is June 10th to 12th. Again, that is a half-day Thursday, all-day Friday, all-day Saturday. So hopefully all of you can come. And we will have recordings available of all these talks probably sometime in the next 7 to 10 days. As far as I've gotten a few questions on whether these presentations will be available online. And I leave that up to the speakers to, if they want to share their PowerPoints, they can. If they don't want to, they want to keep their data themselves, that's fine too. But the videos will be available. So there's that. And if you guys have any questions about getting access to that, you can just email me directly. Otherwise, thank you very much, and have a great rest of the afternoon. And Dr. Gonzalez, thank you for being the last speaker. That's not always the easiest one. So
my pleasure. Thanks.
Okay, thanks everyone.